Good evening and welcome to City and State's Labor Power 100, which is honoring influential people in government, labor unions, advocacy, academia, media, business, and beyond. I'm Zach Williams, Senior State Politics Reporter at City and State. Thank you so much for joining. We got a great lineup of keynote speakers, and of course, we'll round things up with honoring each of the 100 most influential people in labor statewide. But before we get to our first very distinguished speaker, I would be remiss without giving a shout out to our great and wonderful sponsors, Empire Blue Cross, BlueShield, Teamsters Local 456, Civil Services Employees Association, Strook, and of course, MagnaCare. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this event without you. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce Thomas Denapley, the Comptroller of New York State. He's not only the longest tenured statewide official, but he's also the person in charge if it has anything to do with public money in New York State. Comptroller?
Zach, thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be with you and with everyone that's following the Labor Power 100 list. I really want to commend City and State, the reporters, the staff, the management, for what you all do day in and day out to shine a spotlight on the issues and the people that are making a difference in our great state of New York. Certainly congratulations to everyone who was on that Labor 100 list. I know just about everybody on there personally, all good friends and all important leaders that are worthy of your recognition. Certainly don't want to single folks out of that list of 100. As I said, so many good friends, but I do want to give a special shout out to our legislative colleagues who really did yeoman service, really delivering on the labor agenda during this very difficult year that we've all gone through. And I know 3 of them are giving remarks as part of your program, but really want to commend Senator Jessica Ramos, the labor chair in the Senate, Senator Andrew Gounardes, the chair of Civil Service and Pensions, Assembly Member Latoya Joyner, the chair of the Assembly Labor Committee, and my classmate, we were elected the same year to the State Assembly, Peter Abadi, who chairs the Governmental Employees Committee. They have been incredible champions for labor. I am honored to be on that list as well, and I feel very much at home. I think as many recall from past opportunities when I've spoken, I'm very proud to say I grew up in a union household. My dad climbed telephone poles and worked in manholes. He was a cable splicer for the old New York Telephone Company back when we had Ma Bell. And he was represented by Communication Workers of America. And for a period of time, he was a shop steward in the union. I can remember when there was a strike against New York Tel, what that meant, learning at an early age, the importance of solidarity and standing up for worker rights and to protect them. And my mom was a civil service worker in Nassau County, and she was represented by Local 830 of CSEA. So I had the experience of parents on the public sector side and private sector side, and certainly having a secure economic well-being that enabled my family to live out our version of the American dream. That was secured by the labor movement, and I always carry that in my heart and in my mind with the work that I do. So, certainly over this past year, with all the struggles, labor and unionized labor have been on the front lines of getting through this challenging time. And I appreciate that as state controller, and certainly in my 2 decades serving in the state legislature, my door was more than open to labor whenever any issue was brought to our attention. It's certainly why as controller we've continued to use our clout, particularly with regard to the investment work we do when we need to press companies to do right by workers on a host of issues. We use that power as a shareholder to try to push the agenda in a positive way for workers and for unions. And when there's a local labor issue, we've often written a letter, reached out, sometimes walked a picket line. And so that's why, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men and women who are on your list and those that may not be on the list, but certainly are part of the labor community. To me, that has always been a privilege. And, and as I alluded to, we've been going through this incredible confluence of circumstances, a public health pandemic, a crashing economy that's been slowly recovering, social justice, racial justice reckoning happening at the same time. And through all of this, it's really the workers of New York that have been on the front lines of getting us through these challenges. I see it up close. In addition to being an elected official, I head a government agency. We've got like 2,800 employees, most of whom are civil service, represented by PEF and CSEA. Most of our employees have been working virtually, but they've been getting the work done. And we have been working very closely with our local reps from PEF and CSEA, and I've certainly been in regular touch with Wayne Spence, president of PEF, and Mary Sullivan, president of CSEA, to just know what the issues are, certainly in our own agency, to make sure that we're flexible with work schedules, that people are able to do their work safely. And certainly they've kept me up to date about the broader issues that are happening with the public workforce here in New York State. And our union employees are helping us get the work done. The payments are being made, the contracts are being approved, those pension checks are getting out there. The unemployment benefits, just keep in mind, over the past year, really since March of last year, believe it or not, we've processed, working with the Department of Labor, with the back end of that process to cut the checks, we've processed $82 billion of unemployment benefits, $82 billion. For the year before, prior to the pandemic, we paid out on an annual basis about $2 billion versus $82 billion. Really shows the economic devastation at a household level, at a very personal level of what's been going on. So I've seen the power of union labor working through the challenges we've been facing. We're seeing it on the front lines, public sector, private sector workers getting us through this very, very challenging time that all the communities have been facing with regard to COVID-19. And look, we have to acknowledge that too many of our workers contracted the disease, and some of whom passed away. We've tried to enhance benefits for those, certainly on the public side, but yet we've seen our essential workers showing up, getting the job done no matter what. And we could never forget that. We always need to salute that. Obviously, from our perspective in the Controller's Office, we come a long way from where we were a year ago, both looking at the public health numbers and certainly the economic numbers as well. We're not back to where we want to be, but we've seen significant progress. The unemployment numbers are way down from those, over 20% double-digit unemployment that we saw back in April and May of last year, when so many jobs were lost. The state unemployment rate now is about 8.5%. New York City is higher. New York City, and many of the economic indicators, continues to lag. The rest of the state, which is kind of the reverse of what we usually see, over 11.5% for New York City. So, we've regained back a little over half of the jobs that we lost. We're seeing more progress. We look at different kinds of revenue sources. Sales tax revenue, it's still down year over year, but much better than the 27% drop that we saw in the second quarter of 2020. For the first quarter of 2021, the drop was only 3.9%. Again, outside the city, many counties actually are now seeing a gain in sales tax. The city has still been a negative. And certainly overall revenues, personal income tax, other tax collections, we continue to be ahead of projections. So that's good news in terms of the state budget. The big game changer this year was the American Rescue Plan, building on some of the federal aid we received last year. But that $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, the $12.6 billion for the state, $5.9 billion for New York City, $4.9 billion for local governments outside the city, more money for schools, hospitals, and so on, really has made a big difference. And it's helping to lift up workers and businesses that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. Unemployment relief, targeted aid for the restaurant sector, for venues that have been shuttered, micro businesses, very important federal aid. And using about half of the money that came to the state, our colleagues in the state legislature made some important investments, historic investments, particularly in education, environment, infrastructure, economic development, support for excluded workers. It's a long list that was part of the state budget. Building on the federal aid, judgment, decisions being made to raise revenue in terms of additional taxes on higher income New Yorkers, and some other revenue raisers as well. And I think those investments are going to help us get through this challenging time more quickly than we would have otherwise. I think the challenge from our perspective is, and we still have to see the updated state financial plan, with the federal aid will not be there forever. We have to make sure those revenue projections are going to hold up. Long term, the challenge for us in New York has always been aligning recurring revenue with recurring spending. So we're certainly going to continue to keep a close eye on that and report to policymakers, to the public, and to everyone to make sure, we stay on track in that regard. And we are continuing our efforts to report on economic development statewide, and we've had a real focus on New York City's economy because of all the struggles there. We just did a report, as many of you know, on tourism. We have reports on what's happening with mass transit, arts and entertainment, restaurant, retail sector, and so on. We're going to keep those reports coming out. One bright spot has been the state pension fund. Zach and I were talking about this a little bit offline before we went on. We had a slight loss in the pension fund. We value the fund March 31st every year. So last year, March 31st was when the pandemic had just hit. Markets tanked. We were down a little bit, but we don't have our final numbers yet. We hope to announce those in the next couple of weeks. But I can tell you with what I've seen preliminarily, we're probably going to have our strongest return in at least 40 years. So the last time there was a evaluation made of our funded status, we were about 98% funded, virtually a fully funded pension plan. Took a little hit last year, but with the gains we're going to report this year, we're going to be back well over 90% funded. So we continue to be one of the best funded state pension plans in the country. Good news for our public workers, future retirees, current retirees. It's why I continue to support the defined benefit pension plan. We're managing it the right way. We are using as I mentioned, our shareholder power to advocate on behalf of key environmental, social issues, worker issues, LGBT issues. Climate change has been an important part of our effort as well. We've actually got an interesting shareholder proposal. It's going to be voted on May 26th at Amazon, become a big part of all of our lives. But there have been a lot of issues about racial discrimination and how workers have been treated at Amazon. They've made certain verbal commitments, but they seem to be falling short. So we actually have a shareholder proposal to require a racial equity audit of Amazon. We're hoping to get enough support to compel the company to do that. They tried to get the SEC to prevent that shareholder vote from going forward, but fortunately the SEC supported us with that. I mentioned climate. We have a very ambitious climate action plan to deal with the risk of climate change and also to have more money allocated to take advantage of the emerging green economy in a way that'll benefit the pension fund. But we also think that it will help to create some of those jobs we've all been looking for in the green economy, in the lower carbon economy that is our future. So more support for renewable energy, infrastructure, energy efficiency. And again, I'm hoping that money could be spent in New York as well as around the country and around the globe, and particularly with regard to our investments on infrastructure, real estate as well. We partner with our friends in labor. Shout out to Gary LaBarbera and the trades helped us craft a responsible contractor policy that really has become the model for investors across the country. So putting our money to work in a good way and making sure that workers are treated in the right way continues to be a priority for us. So, as I wrap up, I would just say that it's still a challenging time for labor on many levels. Fortunately, in New York, we have a more hospitable climate for unions and for organizing. But the kind of attacks that we saw, especially going back 10 years ago with the Great Recession and the rollback of worker benefits, particularly in the Midwestern states, the move to right to work, the Janus decision from the Supreme Court, there really have been a lot of assaults on labor. So we really can't let down our guard. And I think we've learned the hard way through the pandemic how important it is to support workers, to support the unions that speak up to make sure that the workplaces are safe and we're looking out for the interest of all of our employees. While there are challenges, I've seen some bright spots. Again, not to, there's so many, I run the risk of singling some out, but I think of Dan Kane Jr. and the Teamsters Local 202 and the strike they had at Hunts Point, and they were successful in getting a successful resolution and pay increase for their workers. Shout out to Stu Applebaum, RWDSU. I know he's on the labor list. The publicity and the support generated by the effort to unionize that Amazon warehouse in Alabama was incredible. Now, the vote fell short of where we hoped it would be, and obviously Stewart's made the point that the company did some things to undercut that effort. But I think the kind of support that was rallied around that, and I know the determination of Stewart and RWDSU, they're not going to give up the fight. And I think that should be an inspiration to everyone. New York, in so many ways, was the birthplace of the labor movement, certainly the birthplace of state action, government action to respond to labor concerns. You think of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and the change in law that came out of that right here in New York. And as we continue on the path to recovery, and we hope for a full recovery as soon as possible, let's make sure that it is an equitable recovery in every way, so that everyone benefits from it. We need to learn some lessons from the inequality of what we've gone through, not just over the past year, but historically, issues that haven't been fully addressed. So I think it really underscores the need for us in government, and certainly for the business community as well, to work in partnership with labor. Again, looking at that Labor Power 100 list, we've got the best labor leaders anywhere in this country, anywhere in the world. So the opportunities for partnership are real, and we should never forget that our workers deserve respect and dignity on the job, economic security, and they deserve dignity in their retirement as well. That continues to be a very high priority for me. So that partnership also includes the press and city and state, your role in highlighting all of these important issues. So we thank you for that. And let's do all that we can to value and empower our working men and women. Let's do all that we can to value and empower our unions as well, the organizations that represent them so ably. If we don't do that, we're not going to have that stronger, more resilient, more inclusive economy. That should be all of our collective goals. So thanks for giving me a few moments to speak with you. And again, congratulations to everyone on that Labor Power 100 list.
So we're running, thank you so much. Well said, Comptroller. We're running just a few minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm hoping you can indulge a question or two.
Sure.
You've been comptrolling for quite a while. And I'm sure you've seen all sorts of stuff over the course of your career, including your time in the assembly. But this last year must have really took the cake. Not only did we have the historic stock market crash that you alluded to, a deadly pandemic, the protests following the murder of George Floyd, so many things. So I was hoping maybe you could just take a minute to just share, was there a moment over the past year that really sticks in your mind of like, wow, that was 2020 as far as being a comptroller is concerned?
Yeah, I think, I guess I would respond to that, Zach, by saying the, almost like the whiplash effect of what we went through. The pandemic hit so swiftly, and the reaction to it in every way, in terms of fear, sickness, death. I mean, you think of the people we all knew that that passed away in those first few weeks. It was a horrendous time. You're right, the stock market crashing, and certainly from my perspective, of being concerned about the pension fund. I remember 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when the Great Recession hit, I said, I can't believe, are we going through this again? And will that question that people that criticize, pensions always say they're not sustainable, we can't afford it. Are we going to be in a time where we're going to be on the defense about that? And then if that wasn't enough, what happened to George Floyd, and not just George Floyd, obviously, so many of the other Black lives that have been lost, and these terrible stories over the past year, and folks going to the streets and saying, we got to deal with this. This is way overdue to deal with this. You really had the sense that it was all coming apart. And that was a very scary sense. I don't know. I mean, I guess I felt that way, especially as a downstater, when 9/11 happened. I mean, that was probably the time of comparison. And as comptroller then, really projecting in many ways gloom and doom. When we were talking about the loss of revenue and where we saw the economy headed, back in March, April, May, it was all negative, right? It was all negative. And then to be sitting where we are a few months later, and to have seen that there was more resilience in our economy than probably we had given it credit for, And that with everything we were dealing with, and even with too many people not working, the economy was in slow and steady ways coming back. And then the tremendous relief of the outcome of the elections in November. I mean, obviously as a Democrat, I was quite pleased with the outcome, but now that we see the full impact of having Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, seeing the House Democratic majority be sustained, having Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader, the delivering of billions of dollars, not just to New York, but obviously we're particularly concerned about New York, has created a lifeline and a foundation for those investments I mentioned that the state legislature was able to accomplish this year. It is such a different feeling from where my head was at, going back a year or so ago. I think it just underscores in many ways, the unpredictability of the times we're going through, and in a positive way. Again, we're not back to where we want to be. The more work for us to do, but the strength, the ultimate strength of New York. A lot of people have been down on the city. The city's going to come back. I mean, it may take a while. It's going to come back, and it really gets back to what we're talking about in the discussion today. Our greatest resource are our people. And our greatest resource are the working men and women that we have in our state, the folks like my parents that just show up, play by the rules, do the job. And, again, a lot of corporations, have actually done well during this challenging time. So we need to make sure that, especially for the ones that are doing well, that they are recognizing the hard work of the working people in the trenches that have enabled them to do well. And that's why making sure we have strong unions that can secure the economic security, retirement security, the middle class. The reason the middle class has been under assault and under challenge for so
I beg
many
your
years.
pardon, Comptroller. We're going to have to leave it right there.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just say the reason they've been under assault is that our unions have been under assault. So strong unions mean a strong middle class.
There we go. Thank you so much, Comptroller. I guess we'll have to wait. I was talking to one of your many friends in the Capitol the other week. We'll have to leave it to another time where you can answer truthfully whether you were truly born with a lapel pin or not.
I'll save it for another time.
Thank you so much, Comptroller. It's a real
Zach.
pleasure to have you with us. In lieu of audience applause, I'll give a little clap from my apartment here.
Thank you.
Thanks again. And now we're going to segue to another heavy hitter of labor power in New York State. We have pre-recorded comments from Roberta Riordan, Commissioner of the New York State Department of Labor.
Thank you to City and State. It is an honor to be named to this year's New York State Labor Power 100 list and to be in the company of so many other wonderful leaders in the labor community. I'd like to congratulate all of those on this year's list and give a special shout out to my fellow speakers and colleagues in government, New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, State Senators Jessica Ramos and Andrew Gounardes, and Assemblymember Latoya Joyner. Now, it goes without saying that this past year was a challenging year for all of us in labor. Just over a year ago, unemployment in our state was at a record low. We had the highest number of private sector jobs in New York State history, and we had just experienced 36 consecutive quarters of job growth. All of that changed overnight as COVID-19 shut down our state, and the tsunami of unemployment claims came flooding into the Department of Labor. To give you some perspective about this crisis, since the pandemic began until now, the Department of Labor has paid over $81.3 billion in unemployment benefits to more than 4.6 million New Yorkers. All of us in labor communities across the state were faced with an upside-down world, and we had to learn how to do things we had never done before. We literally had to figure out how to steer the ship without a compass. Think about this for a moment. This is one of the largest crises we have ever faced in this state. And all of us in labor stood shoulder to shoulder. And look at how far we have come. As difficult as this pandemic has been, it was the leadership of the men and women on this list who not only steered their ships, but kept us afloat. You provided critical leadership and vision to your workers to keep them protected and moving forward. And because of that, you kept all of us on task. Despite the challenges we faced, all of organized labor, building trades, private sector, public sector, continue to play an essential role throughout this pandemic. We are all in awe of our medical professionals, the heroic work they did and the risks that they took to keep us healthy and safe. However, bravery and courage come in many forms. Let's not forget about the workers behind the scenes. From our delivery workers, to the clerks that stocked our grocery store shelves, to the public sector workers who kept our state agencies running so they could provide vital assistance to New Yorkers who needed it most. In the midst of an unprecedented and impossible crisis, all of you and your members put your lives at risk and went to extraordinary lengths to make sure we were fed, received the care we needed, and got the services and assistance that we could not go without. Some unions whose workplaces were shuttered went the extra mile to help, for instance, sewing masks and gowns for our healthcare workers in the trenches. This past year was an incredible example of teamwork in the real world at its best. Now, I know firsthand that our unions are our greatest allies, and I can personally attest to the power of a union in a worker's life and in the communities they work in and serve. And I can tell you that my background and all of my experiences in labor have prepared me for serving as your Commissioner of Labor, leading the DOL through the greatest challenge this agency has ever faced. Winston Churchill said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," and we surely did not. As taxing as this pandemic has been on our systems and our DOL family, we embrace these challenges head on and use these opportunities to thoroughly reevaluate best practices to better serve New Yorkers. From launching a new Google-backed application to standing up a new COVID portal to protect workers, I know all of you have all done similar and remarkable things, all without a manual. As we look to the future, the good news is we have a governor who has an aggressive, forward-thinking vision for our state. Just like you, throughout this crisis, he provided exceptional leadership throughout our darkest days. The COVID-19 pandemic brought worker protection and safety to the forefront during this public health crisis. And thanks to our legislators and our governor, we have so much to be proud of in this year's budget, including the passage of the New York HERO Act. I also want to thank our Comptroller, Thomas Denapley, and his team for their dedication throughout this crisis, making sure that our programs were funded and that money was flowing appropriately. This is a pivotal time for our workforce, our unions, our industries, and our communities. We all learned many valuable lessons this past year, and we are better and stronger because of it. Because of this crisis, all of us have an opportunity to reimagine a better New York. On the bright side, we all have more tools in the toolbox to help us build that better future. As our communities and businesses reopen, the DOL is continuing to implement resourceful ways to help New Yorkers get back to work, finding creative solutions to help businesses thrive in a new world of work. From new virtual services to more workforce development programs, we are reimagining a new New York. And from our labor officials to our elected leaders, I know all of you are too. That's one of the amazing things about the labor movement. We are a collective of team members, and teamwork is going to be key as we emerge from these challenges stronger than ever. New York was leading by example before this pandemic, and we did not let this crisis stop our progress. As the governor reminded us, when things were at their worst last year, New Yorkers showed their best. And together, we will reimagine, rebuild, and renew New York. I look forward to the ongoing work we will do together to build a better New York for all. Thank you for this honor. Congratulations to all of you. Be well and stay safe.
Well, that was a pretty rousing speech. We certainly thank the commissioner for taking the time to deliver that message. And next, without further ado, I love talking to the comptroller, love hearing from the commissioner, but at my heart, I know I'm always a legislative reporter for city and state. And one of the up-and-comers in the legislature in the last couple years, ever since the Democrats took over the state Senate for the first time in a decade in 2018, has been Jessica Ramos, chair of the Labor Committee, who has spearheaded all sorts of initiatives aimed at helping working people. And without further ado, let's hear what she has to say. Senator?
All right. Well, thank you, Zach. Good evening to you, to the whole team at City and State. Thank you so much for honoring so many members of the labor movement, the people who make sure that policy is being written with working class New Yorkers in mind first and foremost. So I do want to give a shout out, of course, especially to my former unions, 32BJ, Local 371, and DC 37, the building trades, the hotel trades council, and everybody that I've been able to work with throughout my career in the labor movement. And now as chair of the labor committee, which of course I see as an extension of my work and my vocation to improve the lives of those who work so hard and receive so little in return. You know, I wanted to really talk about a little bit of where we were prior to the pandemic, and then the you know, where the pandemic has really left us and what it might look like going forward. Because, you know, Commissioner Riordan is right. There is so much more work to do because the pandemic really just exposed all of the holes and system failures in our society, and how it is that we think about working people. You know, I've always believed that work is actually what binds us together. The idea that we're able to, of course, provide for ourselves and our families, but also the fact that we choose careers where hopefully we are helping others live a better life themselves. And it's been unfortunate that over the past several decades, we've actually seen productivity skyrocket while wages have largely remained stagnant, if not declining. And of course, we've seen the cost of living keep creeping up. That's especially true in New York, where no house is really, you know, being sold for $100,000. And so, you know, we really are being given an opportunity here to rethink how we value the work that New Yorkers do, and how we value working families themselves. The reality is that even before the pandemic, New Yorkers have redefined what the New York hustle is. And unfortunately, the issues of underemployment and the constant emergence of different cash industries really have resulted with New Yorkers having 2-3 part-time jobs, perhaps even making tamales in the morning, or, you know, selling Tupperware on the side. These are all things that, of course, are dignified in us being able to provide for our families, but it also means that New Yorkers are spending less time with their families, which is something that we really want to value in making sure that we are putting education and putting public safety first. These are, of course, all things that are intrinsically linked. And so from the beginning, I've really set out to think about how it is that we lift up all workers. You know, my near decade in the labor movement, really, that was one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that, you know, you lift from the bottom, because lifting the bottom lifts everybody else up. And so a lot of my work in the labor committee has been focused around helping migrant workers, whether it was the farm workers my first year, whether it was legalizing e-bikes in order to end the crackdown against our delivery workers. And today, of course, the Excluded Workers Fund and my ongoing quest to end wage theft in New York once and for all. These are all things that help us all across the state, both indirectly, and indirectly. Here in the epicenter of the epicenter, we lost, of course, a large number of loved ones. People are still grieving. People are still grieving the loss of their job. Many lives are forever changed. And this is why we of course know that workplaces are forever changed too. More people are working from home than ever before. And workplace safety has finally been given a center stage that was quite needed. Companies like Amazon have been mistreating workers way before the pandemic. And so seeing Amazon workers organize with our WDSU, seeing what the Teamsters are doing to help the UPS workers out in Eastern Queens, seeing how journalists and fact checkers at the New Yorker and many of the Condé Nast publications are starting to organize in order to demand fair pay, has really been inspiring, and hopefully really contributes to not only more New Yorkers organizing, but what I see as my mission, which is to grow our labor movement, to strengthen the AFL-CIO, whose leadership has really allowed us, and I want to give a shout out, of course, to Mario Salento, to Mike Neidl, and everybody else at the AFL-CIO here in New York, who have been unwavering and unrelenting in their support of my measures and many of my colleagues' measures in order to improve the lives of working class New Yorkers. For a long time, we have engaged in this scarce mentality of scarcity, where really most of us are fighting over just a few crumbs. A few months ago, you all heard me continuously rant about just how many billionaires live here in New York and how I believe that they should pay their fair share of taxes. Now, I didn't get my way, or at least not yet, but it was important to really have New Yorkers understand just how deep inequality is here in New York. There is enough wealth, there is enough money for New Yorkers to lead better lives. And so I'm looking forward to having these and many other conversations with my colleagues, with allies, with other stakeholders who are looking to improve the economy in a way that is inclusive and just for all. There are, of course, many topics that we can touch today. With the Department of Labor, a lot of my work is, of course, in providing oversight, and I've been very disappointed at how the Department of Labor has been able to handle, the process of making claims for unemployment insurance. I've slowly but surely been passing bills to give the Workers' Compensation Board a better face. And I, of course, am now hoping that the Department of Labor helps us put forth the best possible excluded workers program, implemented with the workers in mind, certainly pushing for language access and for deep accessibility. For all of these things, our state agencies need to properly be funded. And unfortunately, the austerity politics of the current governor Hello? All right, I think I'm back.
I can hear you now, Senator.
Okay, good. So we've really been asking for a lot more resources so that the DOL can increase its capacity and really be able to administer these programs in the way that New Yorkers deserve to be serviced. There are going to be so many topics that are related to labor that will be coming up over the next few weeks, and certainly in preparing for the next year. I've been talking about wage theft a lot. In New York State, wage theft happens to the tune of $1 billion every year, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, and that's a pre-pandemic statistic. We can only assume that it's gotten worse during the pandemic, when so many folks have been desperate for work. And really that's the problem. Creating a desperation for work actually diminishes workplace standards, diminishes pay and benefits and workers' voice on the job. And so I've been pushing legislation to ban captive audience meetings so that workers can more easily organize without any intimidation from their employers. I have been working also for some debt forgiveness for our taxi drivers. We've been fighting for corona presumption in order to make sure that everyone who contracted the virus while they were on the job can actually access workers' compensation benefits. We're still fighting for unemployment insurance not to be taxed in New York State. That is a huge issue that we're having. And of course, there is the inevitable topic of the gig workers, and understanding that not every gig worker is the same, not every app functions the same way. Some apps set wages, other apps simply act as a referral system. And in thinking through exactly how all of these different industries need to be classified and represented and ensured that nevertheless the worker has a voice on the job. There will be a lot coming from me on that matter over the next few months. And I want to give a huge shout out to my team, which works so hard and really helps me to be the best legislator I can be. Everyone from my chief of staff to my legislative director, my deputy chiefs, everybody really works so hard. And I'm so thankful because slowly but surely we are strengthening our labor movement in New York and therefore strengthening the middle class. So here's hoping that my generation actually still has pensions and someday in New York City we'll be able to afford to buy a home. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. And if anyone in our audience wants an extra serving of Senator Ramos's outspokenness, I suggest you go straight to Google and search New York Times Jessica Ramos food to find out how the real reason or how she connects so many issues, farm workers, gig workers, and so many other working people. It all comes down to the food. Read a really good article. I suggest you give it a read after our event. Thanks again, Senator. Real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Zach. This is fun.
So we're going to keep the fun going with our next speaker, which will also be pre-recorded. Something that's kind of interesting that I really didn't appreciate till I started covering the New York State Legislature is you have the Labor Committee, which deals with some very important issues, but you also have the Civil Service and Pensions Committee in each chamber, which, while it might not always be in the headline, has an enormous influence on millions of public sector workers across the state, whether they're firefighters, police, or anyone else. So without further ado, let's hear what State Senator Andrew Gounardes, the chair of the State Senate Civil Service and Pensions Committee, has to say.
Hi, good evening. I'm State Senator Andrew Gounardes, and I want to start by thanking City and State for inviting me to join you this evening. I also want to say a big hello and thank you to all of my colleagues, friends, and allies in the labor movement for joining tonight's program. We're gathered here because we recognize the extraordinary work that our unions have done throughout this pandemic. We know that when unions are strong, New York is strong. And that's exactly what our unions have demonstrated over the last year, strength in the face of hardship. Throughout this grueling last year, our essential workers and union members have worked tirelessly to keep our city's lights on, maintain our infrastructure, aid in our recovery, and most importantly, help nurse us and get us back to health in the face of a global health crisis. While many of us were homebound and zoomed our way through our 9 to 5, our frontline union workers simply did not have that luxury. Many of them lost their lives because they were carrying out their duties to promote the health, safety, and well-being of our city and state. That's why last year I introduced legislation that would guarantee that any public employee who contracted COVID-19 during the pandemic would be eligible for accidental death benefits to be paid out to their family members. Those essential workers that we lost to COVID-19 gave their lives in a war against a vicious and cruel virus. Their families have suffered a horrific loss, as has our city and state, and they should not have to wait or be denied to get the benefits that are owed to them. It's safe to say that there's probably been no time in generations since essential workers have had to play such a pivotal role in the sustainment and rebuilding of our city and state as they've had during the last tumultuous year. Many frontline workers have faced horrible working conditions throughout the pandemic, and we owe them a debt of gratitude, which is why all workers deserve hazard pay. This pandemic has exposed the unfortunate reality that working people have largely borne the cost of the pandemic. That does not mean that essential workers are expendable workers, and that's why it's so important that we take steps to do everything we can to support our essential workforce. While providing the essential services that we rely on, these workers, many of them union members, have in some cases been forced to work without protective gear, have had no access to paid leave, all while carrying out the vital work that has kept our city and state running throughout this crisis. As we move forward towards recovery, it's crucial that we include all workers in getting vaccinated to make sure that we are able to get our city and state back on track and to safely reopen. We have to ensure that these essential employees, including healthcare workers, grocery workers, emergency service personnel, police officers, firefighters, teachers, and so much more, receive the vaccine in as expeditious a manner as possible to decrease of getting themselves sick, their family members sick, and to help us safely reopen. That's why earlier this year, I passed legislation that would give every single worker in our state, public and private, access to up to 4 hours of paid leave. Because essential workers should not have to sacrifice their own time on the job in order to take time to get the vaccine to keep themselves safe. We don't have to look that far back in our history to see the laudable work that unions have done for our city in the face of disaster. The events of 9/11 are a great example. 20 years ago this year, our workers proved their resilience when they carried our city through one of the most significant tragedies in our nation's history. Our public workers, who sacrificed so much to help rescue, recover, and rebuild our city, deserve nothing less than our unwavering support. That's why over the last 20 years, we passed laws to protect them, to give them enhanced benefits, and to make sure that their family members were provided for. 4 of those bills were my own that I passed and signed into law in September of 2019 to help support our 9/11 heroes. These bills made it easier for first responders and their families to access the services that they were owed. For the folks that ran into the rubble, who went down to the pile in the days, weeks, and months after, and who helped get our city back, we had a promise that we kept, that we would be there for those first responders in their hours of need as they were for us. Legislation like this represents the kind of support that we should be consistently giving our frontline workers, regardless of whether we face a global pandemic or a devastating terror attack. As we emerge from the COVID crisis, we have to keep an eye towards the long-term effects of COVID and how that's going to impact our workers. And my promise to all of you is that we will continue to stay on top of this and do everything in our power to make sure that none of our workers suffer long-term consequences or effects because of their work during this pandemic or because of getting sick. Something else we need to absolutely consider as part of this is the physical infrastructure and environment that we are sending our workers to go to work to. While the private sector has received substantial guidance from our state concerning which jobs are considered essential during the pandemic, New York's public sector has not fared so well. Many civil servants across the state have continued to experience health and safety challenges on the job regarding access to PPE, transportation, emergency housing, contract tracing, and protocols for the safe reopening and cleaning of their work areas. That's why last year we passed into law my bill to require every single public employer to create a pandemic emergency response plan so that every single person will know what has to happen in order to make sure that we can handle a pandemic safely, as well as make sure that we can safely reopen our workplaces so that no one has to put their lives at risk or their health into jeopardy in order to do their job. As we are now starting to see the reopening of our city and state public agencies, it's more important than ever that we make sure that these plans are being adhered to and that we make sure that no workers are being put at risk of getting sick due to COVID. The coronavirus pandemic has tested the resiliency of New York's workers and has put many of our frontline employees at the risk of contracting a deadly disease, while also dealing a devastating blow to our local economy. I'm incredibly proud to say that our state workforce has risen to the occasion and has helped us and positioned us to be able to come back even stronger. While our allies in labor are carrying on the fight, proving their resilience and their effectiveness in organizing workers to secure protection for their members, we need to never forget that they still need our support through policy, advocacy, and investment. That's why I plan to continue fighting for pensions and families of frontline workers as part of my chairmanship of the Senate Civil Service and Pensions Committee, and also why I will continue to be a strong ally of our friends in the private sector labor movement to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support these workers. 2 years ago, I spoke with you all and I told you that I was going to go around the state meeting with workers in all different workplaces to learn firsthand about how they perform their jobs and what they do and how much they value and contribute to our city and state. This year, as we start to safely reopen, I plan to do the same exact thing. I will go around the state and meet with public workers and private workers to learn firsthand what experiences and lessons they saw from the pandemic so that we can make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect our workers for the future. I want to thank you all so much for inviting me to join you this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor for me to be part of this great program. I want to thank City and State for the invitation. I want to say thank you and a deep, profound sense of appreciation to all of our workers across New York State, public workers, private workers, because you have not been forgotten. Your sacrifices, your determination, and your willingness to put it all on the line so that the rest of us can get through will never be forgotten. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you do, and they can continue to stay safe, healthy, and well. Have a great night.
Well, gosh, I feel all fired up after that one. I can't wait to see what he does on his latest statewide tour in the upcoming months. Now, there's two things that I want to mention before I introduce our next speaker. One of them is civil service and pensions often deals with very convoluted issues that are so important. So if you ever need Senator Gounardes to explain it, just ask him a little bit about his interest in history, as evidenced by the LBJ series by Robert Caro that was right behind his shoulder right there. He's not a power broker guy, he's an LBJ guy. And the second thing that I would like to mention is just, I will confess, I'm a millennial. And it's really exciting to see a new generation of legislators coming into office and really stepping up. Whether you agree with them or not, it's just so exciting to see younger people, and by younger 30-somethings, getting involved in politics and really starting to lead the Empire State in new directions. And with that, I will say that our next speaker is rounding up the millennial bench, and that is Assembly Member Latoya Joyner, who is giving the chair of the Assembly Labor Committee, who will be delivering pre-recorded remarks as well.
Hello, everyone. I am Assemblywoman Latoya Joyner. I want to thank City and State for taking the time to recognize all of the leaders in the labor movement during the State Labor Power 100th celebration. As a daughter that comes from a long lineage of bricklayers and a lawyer that spent the beginning years of my legal career dedicated to defending workers' rights, I fully understand that working families are at the heart of New York's foundation and economy. It is imperative for us to place their needs at the forefront of any public policy agenda, especially as our state rebounds from the impact of COVID-19. And now, as a member of the New York State Legislature and chair of the Assembly Labor Committee, my colleagues and I are committed to doing just that. 2020 was a year like no other, unlike anything we've seen before. This pandemic exposed and exacerbated cracks in our economic system that many have known for far too long. This crisis resembles the face of many who we refer to as moms, sisters, and tias. The 2008 recession came to be known as the man-cession because more men were affected. This past year, we have seen how women shoulder the brunt of 55% of the 20 million jobs lost since the start of the pandemic. And the unemployment rate for women is at 15%, and 16% for Black women and over 20% for Hispanic women. This economic recession is known as the she-cession. As we envision the road to economic recovery, women must be at the center and lead from the front on any proposal put forth. This past budget, we included a $50 million COVID-19 workforce recovery initiative that will focus on the hardest hit communities. We must ensure equal investment in our roads and bridges infrastructure, as well as in our child care and care infrastructure, so that everyone can return to work and all families can thrive. This past year, unforeseen unemployment has reached record levels, and the need to reimagine our unemployment system is as critical as ever. This session, we've taken up bills to undo our punitive UI system that penalizes workers who are partially employed by creating a partial benefit credit. We're also working to extend the shared work program to retain valuable employees and avoid layoffs. This crisis requires New York State to step up to the plate with a new vision and bold action. We saw the shortcomings in our social safety net programs and the need for our state's leadership. Luckily, we were able to rise to the occasion with the enactment of the Excluded Workers Fund. This new $2.1 billion program makes New York the first state in the country to provide assistance to workers who were excluded from both federal and state benefits. There's more work to be done, including supporting our gig workers. Since the pandemic, we saw how critical it is to ensure that their needs are met by the UI, workers' compensation, and disability system. We are appreciative of the federal government's assistance during this pandemic, but New York must have its own long-term plan. Lawmakers need to strike a delicate balance that recognizes the income instability facing gig workers while also acknowledging the flexibility provided by these jobs. As that share of the workforce grows, legislators must maximize economic opportunities for workers and continue to stand up and support our essential workers in this dynamic labor market. New York stepped up to ensure that workers had proper PPE and greater safety measures in the workplace. It is a shame that workers who showed up for us in our greatest time of need had to worry about actually getting paid the wages that they rightfully earned. In January, the Assembly passed the Wage Theft Prevention Act to end the unfair exploitation of construction workers. Any actor who engages in wage theft as part of their business model is not good for New York. We look forward to prioritizing people over profits and ending these harmful practices. I appreciate the opportunity to focus on these labor-related issues during this 2021 legislative session, and I look forward to getting these key items done before the gavel comes down at the end of session. I look forward to being your partner as we build a better New York that we can all be proud of.
Another rousing speech from a up-and-coming legislator in here in Albany. And now we're really getting to the real event, which is honoring all the people that made our wonderful list, the most influential people in labor across the state, whether they're involved in media, business, advocacy, academia, government, and of course, labor unions. So I'm going to read each of them off in as dramatic effect, with as much dramatic effect as possible, because they really do deserve a lot of credit. These are some very influential people who are really affecting the future of the Empire State as the economic recovery from the pandemic really gets underway. So we're going to start at number 100, who is Lynn Fox, board chair and interim CEO of Amalgamated Bank. At 99, we have Ron Gieri, president of CSEA Local 830. And of course, if you're curious about any of their bios, right there in the chat feature is a link to the list itself where you can read all about them as printed in our latest edition of City and State. At 98, we have Alana Berger, New York Director and Strategic Advisor at Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. At 98, we have Pete Myers, coordinator of the Tompkins County Workers Center. Next up is Laura Skinner, director of the Labor Leading on Climate Initiative at Cornell University. Next, Jessica Maxwell, executive director at the Workers Center of Central New York. Next up, Dan Maldonado, president of Teamsters Local 445. Next, Luis Jimenez, president of Alizana Agricola. Next, Jim Conigliaro Jr., founder of the Independent Drivers Guild. Swear I've practiced these names as best I can. Hopefully I can get them all out correctly. Apologies in advance for anyone that I might mangle just a little bit, but I'm trying here. Next up is Ronald J Walsh Jr., President of Council 82, New York State Law Enforcement Officers Union. Next up, we have a double feature with Diana Sanguilan and Andrea Coyan, interim co-executive directors at the Worker Justice Center of New York. Next, Patrick Giddis, business manager at IBEW 1049. Next, Kevin Mulvihill, partner at Phillips Lytle. Michelle Zettergren, president of the labor and public sector at MagnaCare. And next up is Karen Ignagni, president and CEO of Emblem Health. And then Thomas Canty, general manager and vice president for labor, government, and special accounts at Empire BlueCross BlueShield. Next up is Prabhu Sigamani, director of ROC New York. Next up is Carrie Ann Shalvoy, president of Committee of Interns and Residents at SEIU Healthcare. And then next up is Jeff Volkrant, executive director of Climate Jobs New York. Then we are featuring William Lynn, business manager and financial secretary at International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 30. Next up is Frank DeRiso, president of UFCW, Local 1. Next up is Jomo Okono, council representative at Carpenters Local 276. Then we're featuring Barbara Zayron, president of the New York State Organization of Management Confidential Employees. And a friendly reminder, you can find a link to all of their bios right there in the chat feature that should be at the bottom of your screen. And next up, I believe we have Alexander Colvin, the Dean of the Cornell University's ILR School. Then Robert Bishop, founding member of Pitta, Bishop, and Del Giorno. Ed Draves, partner at Bolton St. John's is next. And then one more down the list as we get closer, we got Alan Klinger, co-managing partner at Strook. And then of course we got James Mason, president of Carpenters Local 277. And the next big person and on our Labor Power 100 list is Richard Witt, the executive director of the Rural and Migrant Ministry. Next up, Nadia Marin Molina, co-executive director of National Day Laborer Organizing Network. Robert Newell, president of UFCW Local 1500. And next up, we got Suzanne Adley and Sonia Singh, another double feature, co-directors of the Food Chain Workers Alliance. And then I think we're now at number 68, Ryan Law, the president of the PBA, the Police Benevolence Association of New York State. At 67, David Gonzalez, District 2 National Vice President at the American Federation of Government Employees. Another duo, Sherry Lewant and Dina Basque at 66, the co-presidents at A Better Balance. At number 65, we got Murad Awade, executive director at the New York Immigration Coalition. At 64, Thomas Mungir, president of the New York State Troopers Police Benevolent Association. And at 63, Joe Pecora Jr., vice president at the Home Healthcare Workers of America. At 62, John Hutchings, director of the New York State Laborers Organizing Fund, LIUNA. At 61, Del Vitale, director of the United Steelworkers District 4. At number 60, Peter Karate, National Business Agent at the American Postal Workers Union. At number 59, we have a triple feature, Jose Lopez, Arlenas Morel, and Theo Oshiro, co-executive directors at Make the Road, New York. At number 58, James Shalito, president of the Utility Workers Union of America, Local 1-2. At number 57, Richard Lanigan, president of the Office and Professional Employees International Union. And now 56, Matthew Arasish, president of the Building and Construction Trades Council of Nassau and Suffolk counties out there on Long Island. Number 55, Adam Urbanski, president of the Rochester's Teachers Association. Rochester's had such a big year. Good to see someone representing on the list. Number 54, Samantha Rosado Ciriello, president of the Yonkers Federation of Teachers. Number 53, Rebecca Dixon, the executive director of the National Employment Law Project. Number 52, Charlene Obernauer, executive director of the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. And number 51, someone that's had a very big couple of weeks with the passage of the New York HERO Act, Maritza Silva Farrell, executive director of Align. We're halfway through. At number 50, John Wierenius, chair of the New York State Public Employment Relations Board. Number 48, Terrence Melvin, secretary treasurer of the New York State AFL-CIO. I think we've all heard of them. Number 47, James Mahoney, president of the New York State District Council of Iron Workers. Number 46, Daniel Levler, president of Suffolk AME. Number 45, Luis Picani, president of the Teamsters Local 456. Number 44, Patrick Purcell Jr., executive director of Greater New York LECET. Number 43, Beverly Brankman, regional director of UAW Region 9A. Number 42, Jeff Binns, regional director of UAW Region 9, as opposed to 9A. And number 41, Rafael Espinal, executive director of the Freelancers Union. Number 40, Michael Powers, president of the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association. Number 39, Sam Frasina, president of the New York State Professional Firefighters Association. Everyone loves firefighters. Number 38, Richard Wells, president of the Police Conference of New York. Number 37, I-Jen Poo, executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. 36, Dee Taylor, international president, Unite Here. And at 35, Philip Rumor, president of the Buffalo Teachers Federation. And number 34, Michael O'Meara, the president of the New York State Association of PBAs, Police Benevolence Associations. And number 33, Peter De Jesus, president of the Western New York Area Labor Federation, the AFL-CIO. We're going to be hearing more about them. They're really stacked here in the low 30s. Mike Blue at 32 is president of the Capital District Area Labor Federation, the AFL-CIO. Right above at 31 is Anne Marie Talicio, president of the Central New York Area Labor Federation of the AFL-CIO. And number 30, Sparrow Tobin, president of the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation of, you guessed it, the AFL-CIO. And number 29, president of the Westchester Putnam Central Labor Body, Thomas Carey. And number 28, we got another Thomas Hayes Swaldy, president of the Teamsters Joint Council 16. At number 27, another duo, Pat Kane and Judy Sheridan Gonzalez, Executive Director and President of the New York State Nurses Association. At number 26, Fred Cole, President of United University Professions. Oh, the AFL-CIO is back on the list. We have John Durso, President of the Long Island Federation of Labor at the AFL-CIO, of course. And number 24, M. Patricia Smith, Senior Counselor to the Secretary of Labor at the U.S. Department of Labor. Ooh, remember I was talking about the HERO Act? That was a big piece of legislation just passed, establishes workplace protections for airborne infectious diseases. And the lead sponsors of that legislation, State Senate Deputy Majority Leader Michael Gounardes and Assembly Member Carinas Reyes, are rounding things up at 23. At 22, we got Rich Marocco, President of the Hotel Trades Council. And at 21, Christopher Erickson, Business Manager at the local Union 3 IBEW. We're really getting down the list now. We're at number 20, Armand Sabitoni, General Secretary and Treasurer at the New York and New England Regional Manager at Laborers International Union of North America. And we just heard from number 19, Latoya Joyner, the chair of the Assembly Labor Committee. And right above her is Andrew Gounardes, chair, of course, of the State Senate Committee on Civil Service and Pensions. It looks like a little seniority helped out for Peter Abate Jr., who is the chair of the Assembly Committee on Governmental Employees, the Assembly counterpart of the State Senate Committee on Civil Service and Pensions. And at number 16, Mary Sullivan, President of the Civil Service Employees Association. And at 15, Wayne Spence, President of the New York State Public Employees Federation. Ooh, here we go. Number 14, who is it? It's Thomas Denapley, of course, the State Comptroller, our first keynote speaker today, and the longest tenured elected official, statewide elected official in the Empire State. And just eking out the lucky 13 is Roberta Riordan, the Commissioner of the State Department of Labor, who we also heard from a little bit ago. And at number 12, Dennis Traynor, the Vice President of the Communication Workers of America, District 1. And at number 11, I think we've all heard of this person, Letitia James. Who is she? Well, she's the State Attorney General, one of the most powerful people in the whole state, no matter the power list. And at number 10, I think we've heard of this person as well, Chuck Schumer, of course, the State Senate Majority Leader. And at number 9, Stuart Applebaum, the President of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. And at number 8, Mark Canizaro, President of the New York State Federation of School Administrators. We're getting down there, Number 7, John Samuelson, International President at the Transport Workers Union. And at number 6, big person, not just here in the US, but across the country, Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers. And at number 5, who could this be? Of course, it's State Senate Labor Chair, Jessica Ramos. And at number 4, Mario Cliento, President of the New York State AFL-CIO. Ooh. And at number 3, here's a guy that moved up in the world recently. He used to be the head of the New York City Building and Construction Trades Council. Now he's gone statewide. Of course, Gary LaBarbera, the New York State Building and Construction Trades Council President. We got 2 names left. We've gone over so many people. So many big names in state politics, but when you really think about who's the most powerful when it comes to labor, you know, it kind of goes without saying that these two people really deserve to be at the top. At number 2, Andrew Palata, President of New York State United Teachers. I think we've all heard of that powerful union. And who could be number one? We've gone over so many names. Was somebody missing? Somebody especially powerful, especially in the sphere of labor. I'm just going to hold out, build the suspense just a little bit. Actually, when you think about it, it's pretty obvious. George Gresham, president of 1199 SEIU. You know, in the end, it's not about who's at number 1, who's at number 10, or who's at 99. These are all 100 very distinguished people. And I think we all have to give them a round of applause, of course, from our respective homes. But I'll do it right here on Zoom from my apartment here in Albany. Congrats to all 100 people on the Labor Power 100 list. All of them have played an extremely important role in keeping this state going through one of the most, dare I say, crazy years in not just recent history, but in the 400-year history of the state. Let's give them all one more round of applause. I'll do it in lieu. Hopefully you're clapping along back at home. Congrats again to everybody. In that, we're reaching the end of our event, but I do want to include one last shout out to our great sponsors, representatives of which have also made their own contributions to the labor movement here in New York. Who are these sponsors? Of course, Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield, Teamsters Local 456, the Civil Service Employees Association, Strook, and MagnaCare. Thanks so much. We could not put on this event without you. We just so grateful not only for your support in this event, but also for your respective contributions to the labor movement statewide. Now, we're reaching just the last minute or two in our event, but I would like to plug a few of our upcoming events so that we can keep this conversation going on all the most important issues affecting the Empire State, whether you live upstate, downstate, in the labor movement, outside the labor movement, journalist, legislator, organized labor, no matter who you are, please join us at 10 a.m. on Friday, May 14th for our first in a 2-part series focused on women in government, sponsored by Spectrum. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. And I'll just plug a little thing about that event and why I'm so excited. One of the people that will be speaking is Chantel Smith, who is the Chief Counsel and Chief of Staff to the State Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins. It's not every day that you get a little peek behind the curtain at one of the most influential, but dare I say, relatively unheralded members or people in the state capitol. So again, registration for that event is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. It's at 10 a.m. on Friday, May 14th. And then 4 days later on Tuesday, May 18th is our annual Digital New York webinar at 1 p.m. Is it free? Yes, it is. And you can find out everything you need to know about it on our website, city and, spelled out, state, NY, like New York.com. And then on May 21st at 10 a.m., we have our next installment of our AARP sponsored series focused on the Bronx. So much has gone on. We've done Rochester, we've done Brooklyn, we've done Queens yesterday, the Hudson Valley, Western New York, so many different places, but finally we're going down to the Boogie Down Bronx. It's gonna be a great event. Again, Friday, May 21st at 10 a.m. We'll have a really great slate of legislators speaking to the biggest issues affecting seniors. And again, if you need any more information about either these upcoming events, or if you just want to take another peek at our Labor 100 Power List, just go to city and, spelled out, state, NY, like New York.com, and I'll throw in one shameless plug for my newsletter. Albany Agenda comes out every day at 2 p.m. Find out the latest of what's going on in the state capitol, and you can subscribe at, what's the website? City and state, NY, like New York.com. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a great event. Again, I'm Zach Williams, Senior State Politics Reporter at City and State. Catch you next time.